If there is somewhere in Crimea where the Russians have full control, it's here at the port of Sevastopol. Ships of the Black Sea Fleet block all traffic, military and civilian, draining all life from this otherwise thriving port. This is an easy target for the Russians, but if their intention is to take over all Ukrainian military installations in Crimea, then the mission is not over yet. Ukrainian servicemen have refused to yield to this Russian show of force. The Russians have taken position in front of this army base in Sevastopol. Now, we managed to speak to some of the Ukrainian servicemen through the gate. They said they hadn't received any ultimatum yet. They said they had no intention to surrender the base because they had pledged loyalty to Ukraine, and they also said that they hope that this will be solved peacefully. The soldiers are digging in for the long haul, relying on the support of relatives to keep them going while politicians try to reach a compromise.
This story has two sides. On the one hand, my son has to obey the Ukrainian government that he pledged to serve. Since the government changed, the situation is different and our children are suffering.
The crisis is clearly polarizing opinions in Crimea. Servicemen are coming under pressure to take sides in a place with strong roots in both Russia and Ukraine. Russians are not invaders, this mother shouts at her son and his comrades. They try to explain that they are caught in the middle, but she's not convinced.
We are on our land. This is Ukrainian territory. Many people don't understand us. Here we are from the east, west and south. There are different opinions and people are stressed out. It's hard.
As the crisis deepens in Crimea, perhaps one of the biggest challenges for the Ukrainian military is to stay disciplined in the face of growing divisions in the country they swore to serve. Huda Abdelhamid, Al Jazeera, Sevastopol.
The ongoing battles in Syria are more than 1,000 kilometers away from Ukraine, but the crisis in Crimea may have a real impact. The international community has given this man the job of trying to find peace in Syria, but talks convened by veteran peacemaker Lakhdar Brahimi in Geneva have achieved nothing. Getting both sides back around the table and persuading them, and in particular the Syrian government, to negotiate properly requires pressure from the US and Russia working together. That doesn't look likely now. Just like the peace talks, the deal to remove Syria's chemical weapons was done by US Secretary of State John Kerry and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov. So much has happened since that handshake took place at this very spot less than 6 months ago. US-Russian relations are arguably at their worst point since any time since the end of the Cold War. And that chemical weapons deal is not going to plan. The Syrian government is well behind schedule in getting those deadly agents out of the country. Some believe the Assad government may welcome the fact the world's attention has moved.
I think President Assad is dancing in Damascus right now. Why? Because he knows that the United States has its hands full with the Crimean crisis, and he believes at this stage that a lot of international pressure will be taken out of his back, because all of NATO, all of Europe, all of the United States energy is now into Ukraine.
There could, however, be a downside for President Assad too. He relies on Russian support, particularly weapons and parts for his aircraft and tanks. If the West presses for sanctions against Russian banks and even arms manufacturers, that could really hurt his war machine. James Bays, Al Jazeera of the United Nations.
Let's speak to Barnaby Phillips in Paris for us. And Barnaby, the French foreign minister has been talking about Ukraine, suggesting that there could be sanctions voted in as early as tomorrow.
Yes, that's right. He's talking about the possibility of visa bans against high-up Russian officials and assets being frozen. What I think European leaders want to do is get their act together, get their ducks in a row before that summit meeting in Brussels tomorrow, and coordinate with the Americans and iron out any differences. And John Kerry's here as well. So on the one hand, there will be meetings with Sergei Lavrov, who's flying in from Madrid, an attempt to bridge a vast a gulf or perception with the Russians, and also the West needs to be speaking from the same sheet, if you like, and I think that will also be the focus of the diplomacy in Paris today.
So, of course, this meeting was ostensibly called to deal with the issue of Syria, another issue where Russia is at loggerheads with the US and the West. But that's pretty much been overshadowed by Ukraine, hasn't it?
It has been, yes. I mean, I'm outside the Elysee Palace, and in the next hour or so, the meeting will go ahead. Specifically, it's to do with helping the Lebanese government cope with the spillover effects of the Syrian crisis. And President Suleiman is here. There will be talk about financial assistance for the, 1 million or so Syrian refugees in Lebanon. And there will be talk about financial assistance for the Lebanese army. The Saudis are here, and they're talking about a $3 billion offer to assist and equip the Lebanese government, mainly, it should be said, with French weaponry. So all that will go ahead, but there's only so much diplomacy that can happen on one day. And I think the real focus for John Kerry and Sergei Lavrov and Laurent Fabius and William Hague and all the other Western leaders is going to be on Ukraine. And I think the significance of today is that, yes, Presidents Obama and Putin have spoken on the telephone. The Americans and the Russians have staked out their very different positions and understandings of what's happened in Ukraine over the past weeks and indeed months. Here in Paris, they actually get to meet, that is Kerry and Lavrov, face to face, and we'll get an indication, I would suppose, Julie, of what hope there is of some sort of diplomatic solution. Perhaps that's a little bit premature, but at least momentum towards defusing or toning down the rhetoric and taking some of the heat out of this crisis. Is that an impossible hope, or is it a realistic one? I think Paris will perhaps give us a clue about that today.
OK, we'll wait to see what happens there. Barnaby, thanks very much indeed for that. Well, let's get more on our top story now. Diplomatic efforts to contain the crisis in Ukraine. Lilith Gevorgian is a Ukraine analyst for IHS Global Insight, which provides global market and economic information. She joins me now live from London. Lilith, good to have you with us. So just on this latest line from the European Commission agreeing a $15 billion aid package for Ukraine, how significant is that?
I think it's quite significant, and this is what the Ukrainian new authorities have been seeking for some time now. It is a realization that if the economy is not aided, if the current crisis that slowly engulfing Ukraine, both economically and politically, has to be contained. One way of doing this is to prevent Ukraine from further going into recession and also the very high risk of default. And that's what the European Union has done. They have come up with a plan which I believe is to be implemented in 2 years, and the aid will be provided in the space of 2 years. But it's a very positive sign and positive signal that they are dealing with Ukraine's economic situation.
Yeah, because the seeds of the current crisis are rooted in Ukraine's economic situation. Ironically, though, the latest crisis is also having a very detrimental impact on Russia's economic situation.
Absolutely. I don't think you can take out economy from this crisis. And as you've mentioned, ultimately, President Yanukovych, when he was making his choice between Russia and EU, it was really Russia's easy money, so to speak, that attracted him. And of course, looking forward, if the economy is not dealt with, if they cannot contain the potential default, this will have impact not just on the eastern parts of Ukraine, but it could also cause social discontent across the country in the western parts as well. So it's very important to make sure that the economy is under control.
Russians have shown no sign of being willing to withdraw from the Crimean Peninsula. We've now got various European leaders, including Laurent Fabius, the French Foreign Minister, saying that there could be sanctions voted on tomorrow, like visa bans and asset freezing, things like that. Is that the right direction to take with Russia? Will that have an effect?
I think we're seeing two processes. On one hand, we do hear the tough talk from the European and US decision makers, but on the other hand, there's also sort of the other type of diplomacy happening, which is bringing Russia on board, or at least trying to bring Russia on board, finding a way of de-escalating the situation, finding a common ground, trying to get the Russians expressing their concerns, the Crimean Russian speakers expressing their concerns, and also trying to find this compromise, because I think the last week showed that despite all the rhetoric, there is no other solution to this conflict but de-escalation and diplomacy. And one way of also doing this is ensuring that Russia has part in Ukraine's economic rescue, because it's an important trading partner, and any negative developments there will have impact on Russia and and European economy.
Lilith, good to speak with you. Thank you very much indeed for that. Lilith Gevorgian speaking to us live from London there.
Well, Kiev's Independence Square, the site of pitched battles just a few weeks ago, has now become a memorial site. People from across Ukraine have been visiting the area to pay homage to those killed during the protests. Nadim Baba has more.
This is one of many entrances to Independence Square in Kiev, which of course became the centre of those anti-government protests. Now, although they're not protesting, they're still coming here in large numbers, at least during the daytime. People are actually camping out here. Some people have given up their jobs for months to maintain their tent city here. There are people trying to keep warm all the time, trying to keep fed, and others helping out as volunteers. Some people have actually been coming here since last November, so 4 months of giving up their day jobs in what they say is a cause for democracy. Many people we spoke to said that they feel that they need to be here until things really stabilize.
The reason we're here is people have to be sure who was elected and who will be elected. We'll stay here until the very end. It's the only way.
I'm sad that so many people were killed. For example, I was walking with someone called Andrei from another city. He was one of those who was killed. I went and put a flower on the spot where he died.
And this is the floral tribute to the scores of protesters who died back in February in those clashes with the riot police. Now, the riot police have long since gone, but people are coming here, taking photos, getting a reminder of exactly the price that was paid for what they call the fight for democracy here. Another potent symbol, the barricades are still up, and that's because many people here feel that they should maintain a presence, they should continue to come to Independence Square until the country's stabilised and they really feel like their voice is being listened to.
In Paris, Europe and the United States try to coordinate their positions in the face of what they consider Russian aggression.
There will be sanctions tomorrow targeting visas, existing economic negotiations, or the assets of a certain number of oligarchs if there's no de-escalation.
De-escalation could come out of talks with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. But he, in earlier remarks in Madrid, stuck to the Russian line that no soldiers have even been sent into Crimea.
I'd like you to explain to me what you mean by pro-Russian forces. If you're referring to the self-defense forces created by the Crimean inhabitants, we do not have any power over them. They don't take our orders. However, the Russian military of the Black Sea Fleet are in their deployment places, and some special alert and control measures have been taken over the whole Black Sea Fleet. As our president said, we will do everything to prevent any bloodshed.
The British raised the possibility, with Ukraine's new foreign minister also in Paris, that this is a chance, not only for the West to talk directly to the Russians, but also for the Ukrainians to do so.
Today we are trying to use every diplomatic opportunity to bring Russia and Ukraine into direct contact with each other at a senior level, to make sure that the governments of Russia and Ukraine are talking to each other, which the Russians have not been prepared to do at a senior level in recent days.
All the activity here at the Elysee Palace suggests there is a willingness for dialogue, but the gulf in perception between Russia and the West over events in Ukraine is vast. Russia considers the new government in Kiev illegitimate, led by extremists. The West is going out of its way to help that government. From Brussels, promises of financial assistance for Kiev.
The package combined could bring an overall support of at least 11 billion euros over the next couple of years from the European Union budget and European Union-based international financial institutions. It is a package designed to assist a committed, inclusive and reforms-oriented Ukrainian government.
The Paris talks will carry on into the evening. Governments had originally agreed to come here to discuss the Syrian war and its impact on Lebanon. But even that conflict has been overshadowed by events in Ukraine. Barnaby Phillips, Al Jazeera, Paris.
Toy soldiers for Putin. It's unashamed propaganda. But when you say you've been invaded, even recruiting local Kiev mothers and children is considered legitimate. The soldiers will be posted to Moscow with the message, if you want to play soldiers, here they are, but leave my father alone.
I brought here 3 kids to collect toy soldiers for our neighbor country, President Putin, for him to play with them, not to play with real people.
As international diplomacy struggles to find an end to this crisis, here in Kiev, the battle for hearts and minds has intensified. This was the old battle-scarred International Press Centre. Now it's been upgraded. Interpreters and slick public relations backup paid for by pro-European business people. First guest speaker, the defence chief.
Because of our correct tactics and our people's refusal to surrender, the so-called blitzkrieg prepared by Putin and his team has totally failed.
In Independence Square, this is what still convinces most people of the justness of their cause. Another shrine to those gunned down on the alleged orders of former President Viktor Yanukovych. Tim Friend, Al Jazeera, Kiev.
Я думаю, що сьогодні не Україна буде втрачати Крим.
I think it's not just Ukraine who will lose Crimea during this crisis. I think it's the whole world who will feel the consequence of this loss. All the leaders in the world should feel the critical moment of this situation.
Це мусять розуміти всі перші лідери світу. Кремль сьогодні
The Kremlin has declared war not to Ukraine, not to Crimea, but to the whole world.
очевидно, що дипломатія
It's evident that diplomacy now doesn't work, and the more time we lose, the more risks we have.
Зараз є такі пропозиції.
I think that currently there is a lot of talk about creating special negotiation groups and about more diplomacy talks. I think that's not to the point. I think that if we follow this course after the 30th of March, after the referendum to be held in Crimea, we shall lose Crimea, and I think we should adhere to absolutely different methods.
Well, so far, the Ukraine crisis has pitted Russia against the United States. But now NATO, the military alliance, may have an important role to play. It has 28 member nations. That's the United States plus its partners in Europe, many of them living in the shadow of Russia. 3 of them, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, are former Soviet states. Poland shares a border with Russia, territory on the Baltic Sea. It called an emergency NATO meeting over the crisis. Now, Ukraine is not a member of NATO, but a partner nation, so it's unclear what NATO would do if Russia moved forces out of Crimea and into eastern Ukraine. I'm joined now by Emmanuel Karagiannis, who is a senior lecturer at King's College London. Thank you so much, Emmanuel, for being with us here on the show. Now, if this escalates any further, what's the next move? Are we likely to see NATO move on Russian forces?
I think it's highly unlikely that NATO will intervene in any way in Ukraine. This is because, first of all, there is still a window for diplomacy. Secondly, I think NATO countries understand that what's at stake is not just the situation in Ukraine, but it's basically world peace, global security. So I doubt if NATO really finds a proper way to intervene. I think it's more likely NATO to declare its solidarity towards the Ukrainian government, but nothing more than just a symbolic gesture towards the Ukrainian government.
Look, we've been hearing from the Western and from the EU side of it, and they tend to paint Russia as the big bad neighbor to Ukraine. Is this justified? Does Russia have the justification to protect its own interests by acting aggressively as it has?
You know, in that part of the world, in the former Soviet Union, history and geography really matter a lot. Russia is a country that has been invaded many, many times by neighboring countries. So that means that the country is suffering from what I call structural insecurity. So when it comes to the political orientation of neighboring countries, the Russian political elite, the Kremlin, is really careful and really, how can I put it? I mean, they really care about the political orientation of their neighboring countries. So in plain English, a pro-Western Ukraine is basically a geopolitical nightmare for the Kremlin.
In what way? How so?
That will basically increase insecurity. I mean, to have NATO there, to have a pro-Western Ukraine with no links to Russia. And you have to understand that from the Russian perspective, Ukraine is not just another neighboring country. Ukraine is considered to be by many Russian nationalists as the cradle of the Russian history, Russian culture. But there is something else there. And this has to do not with Ukraine itself, but it has to do with Kosovo and the NATO intervention in Kosovo.
Can I just ask you, just put a theory to you, but could Putin's aggression in any way be perhaps linked to his own fear that, you know, the peaceful protest movement that's happened in Ukraine could actually happen in Russia as well, and that's why he's acting this aggressively?
Yeah, I mean, probably there are two levels of analysis there. So the first level has to do with domestic developments in Russia. And you remember probably what happened in 2012 when Putin was re-elected. There were some serious protests against Putin. So of course he wants to give now the message that this will not be tolerated domestically. But again, there is something else, and this has to do with Kosovo. And I will insist on this because Kosovo, what happened in Kosovo in 1999 when NATO intervened, and in 2008 when Kosovo was recognized as an independent state, those two developments basically broke a long-standing taboo, post-war taboo about the existing borders in Europe. So from the Russian perspective, Kosovo is both an opportunity and a warning. It's an opportunity now because Crimea can become the Kosovo of the Black Sea, so they can follow the example of Kosovo, but also it's a warning because at that moment, when NATO intervened in Kosovo, Russia was ignored by Western countries. So to me, it's just like a payback time now.
Right, and that's why it's acting aggressively.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming in and talking to us. Emmanuel Karagianis, the senior lecturer at King's College, Doha.
Ukrainian police surround the regional parliament in Donetsk, 2 days after pro-Russia demonstrators stormed the building. In the square below, a man who calls himself the People's Governor. Pavel Gubaryev is for closer ties with Russia and against the new leaders of Ukraine. He broke his hand during a fight with a political rival.
I would like to be as much independent as possible. From the rest of Ukraine.
We call upon Vladimir Putin to help us restore justice and legality.
It's becoming a tale of two Ukraines. People we've met here in the East speak fearfully about what they see as a fascist takeover in Kiev. It's a mirror image of what's happening in the capital, where people are afraid of growing Russian influence in the East.
We tracked down the People's Governor to his headquarters. He says he has 6 people working for him, but he wouldn't let us come inside.
You describe yourself as governor of Donetsk, but who appointed you governor?
I don't call myself governor. The people elected me at a rally on March the 1st. There were about 50,000 of them.
Gubaryev was virtually unknown a week ago. Now he's enjoying local celebrity. Wrapped in the colours of Ukraine, one of his neighbours says the governor is a fake.
He's not a real. He's Putin's agent, and I think he's earning money for that. They want to say to all the world that eastern regions in Ukraine want to separate from Ukraine to Russia. but I think it's not true.
Back in the square, the people's governor wants to retake the parliament. And his supporters are with him. They easily break through the police lines and storm the building for the second time in 1 week. It's true that many people here feel closer to Russia than to the rest of Ukraine. It's also true that others want to stay in a united country. It's a struggle that's playing out right across the east of Ukraine. Jackie Rowland, Al Jazeera, Donetsk.
A long day of diplomacy in Paris brought no concrete results. If at the end a weary John Kerry hinted at progress in his talks with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov, he also said this is a difficult process.
Russia made a choice, and we have clearly stated that we believe it is the wrong choice. That is the choice to move troops into Crimea. Russia can now choose to de-escalate this situation, and we are committed to working with Russia and together with our friends and allies in an effort to provide a way for this entire situation to find the road to de-escalation.
Foreign ministers had originally agreed to come to Paris to talk about the Syrian war and its impact on Lebanon. But even that conflict has been overshadowed by events in Ukraine. All the activity here at the Élysée Palace suggests there is a willingness for dialogue, but the gulf in perception between Russia and the West over events in Ukraine is vast. Russia considers the new government in Kiev illegitimate, led by extremists. The West is going out of its way to help that government. From Brussels, European promises of financial assistance for Kiev.
The package combined could bring an overall support of at least 11 billion euros over the next couple of years from the European Union budget and European Union-based international financial institutions. It is a package designed to assist a committed, inclusive and reforms-oriented Ukrainian government.
And Western governments are still drawing up plans for further sanctions against Russia. The Russians say this is hardly conducive to the success of these negotiations. But at least for now, both sides agree that it's a good idea to carry on talking. Barnaby Phillips, Al Jazeera, Paris.
I'm Elizabeth Paranum with the top stories on Al Jazeera. The US Secretary of State says talks with Russia over the crisis in Ukraine will continue as world leaders try to find a solution to ease the standoff. John Kerry met Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Paris. It's their first meeting since armed men took over key military sites in Crimea. Barnaby Phillips has more on what John Kerry said at that meeting.
He said that he felt he was in a better place at the end of the talks in Paris than where he'd been yesterday, and that he believed he had something concrete which he could take back to President Obama, and he believed that Sergei Lavrov was in the same position vis-à-vis President Putin. But at the same time, John Kerry did not deny that this has been an extremely difficult process, and there still are enormous differences in approach between the United States and Russia on the Ukrainian crisis.
Meanwhile, in Ukraine, hundreds of pro-Russian demonstrators have retaken a government building in the eastern city of Donetsk. They stormed past riot police and raised the Russian flag. The city is a stronghold of the former president, Viktor Yanukovych.